Today I want to do a video about essentially my ELR rifle cleaning technique and what works for me. I do it, and essentially it's a fairly minimal cleaning technique that I use, and I do it pretty much in the same fashion, and it's very much in relevance to how I do my barrel breaking. What I do in a barrel breaking is quite simple. I make sure I've got a clean barrel, I fire a shot, I then run a wet patch, a couple of dry patches, and see how much carbon I've got in the barrel. I'm also checking for metal, copper and that sort of stuff, but really I don't see that sort of stuff as a rule with a modern barrel. I'm simply running, like I said, a wet patch, a couple of dry patches, and see how much carbon comes out. I'll do another shot, and generally I'll find that it's normally 3 to 5 shots, and I'll find that I'm not getting that much carbon when I do the clean. As soon as I've got to that place, which can be at the first shot and could be at the 10th shot, like I said, generally it's 3 to 5 shots, I will find that I'm not, that essentially it's started to settle down a tiny bit. I'll move into 5 shots in a row and then do the same thing. A wet patch and 2 or 3 dry patches, see how much carbon's there. And I'm looking for the same thing, whether it's one lot of 5 shots or it's 5 lots of 5 shots, to get to where I'm not getting as much carbon, not getting as much dirt out of it, the barrel is starting to settle in a little bit, is when I'll then move on to do whether it's 10 shots or 20 shots. What I'm trying to say with that is it's a progression, which really means some barrels are already very nice and polished inside, they're already working very well, and I'm not getting a lot out of them. So I can really have 1 or 2 shots, maybe 3 shots at 1 shot at a time. Then I'll do, on a barrel that's happening very quickly, I'll tend to go to 3 shots and do a clean, and then I'll go and do 5 shots and do a clean, and then I'll do 10 shots and do a clean. And I'll tend to, like I said, that changes for what the barrel's like. What I'm trying to do when I'm breaking in a barrel is very little with the modern barrel in the way of smoothing out the rough edges and things like that. There is a little tiny bit of that probably happening, but more of what I'm doing is actually laying in a little bit of copper, where it's actually laying into the grooves of the actual rifling, and basically doing a little bit of settling the carbon in the same sort of places. So it's basically getting a barrel in a running form. That is really where what I'm trying to carry on with my cleaning. Now in the early days, over here you'll see with the copper solvents and the carbon and metal solvents that we used to run, the Hobbs cleaners and different ones I used to run. I used to run that sort of thing. I'd run out with wire brushes and go through, and with the brass brushes or nylon brushes, and run through the barrels and clean them, and do that reasonably regularly. I really found out of that there would be, after a good clean, it took a few shots to get the gun back on to where it was being consistent and working properly. So several years ago, I really stopped. I haven't ran a brass or a nylon brush or a solvent in a long range rifle for the last 5 or 6 years. I have not put that through one rifle. And these are rifles that I don't do huge amount of shots, but these are rifles that have still done 1,000 to 2,000 rounds, and I've not run any form of solvent through there. I've not tried to clean copper out of the barrels at all. What I'm doing instead, and different oils I've used, but I now really pretty much use Ballistol and Ballistol only. There are lots of other good choices. I've only got the gun oil here at the moment, but there are lots of other good choices. I use my Ballistol with handguns, I use it with my old lever actions and that sort of stuff. I find it does the job well, I like it, and I tend to find with a nice little bit of a soak. And what I'll do to clean a rifle, and pretty much whether I've shot 1 round or I've shot 100 rounds, pretty much have the same cleaning process. And then in that case we'll use a wet mop. Essentially I'll have the right size mop for the barrel. I will basically spray that and soak that with Ballistol. I'll then put that through the barrel, and I'll just basically go up and down a couple of times in there, both backwards and forwards inside the barrel, to make sure the barrel's actually wet with the Ballistol. I'll then remove the mop, let it soak for 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll actually tend to go through with, I'll actually wipe down the, so I'll just with a rag, I'll just take a rag and wipe the excess and any carbon off the actual mop. I'll put the mop back through there, and then I'll push the mop through to where I've actually taken it through. And I tend to have a practice of where I will put the mop through, I'll screw the end off it so I'm not pulling it back again at that stage. I'll pull the rod back out, and then I will at that stage start where I start pushing some patches through. And I'll push patches through until my patch is clean. So, and I'm not getting to where I'm trying to get absolutely clean, but I'll make sure that essentially there's no carbon and there's only really a slight grey mark of where the actual patch has gone through. And like I said, whether it's one shot or it's 100 shots, it's the same process. The last thing I'll tend to do is I'll then take one patch, put a tiny bit of oil on it, run it through, and then put one dry one afterwards. I'm trying to leave a tiny film of the ballistol there. Most of them are stainless barrels, not really an issue in that side of things. It's just a nature of where I come from. I like to have a tiny bit of oil on top of bores, on top of, I should say, any metal. I prefer it to be a little bit damp with oil rather than completely dry. That's how they go in the safe for me, and that's how, by and large, if I do my job right, I really find I can cold bore out of a rifle like that, and I'm also comfortable leaving that rifle in my safe for 12 months like that. So that's my regime, you'd say. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that the copper and any really root-based carbon that's part of the actual running barrel is staying in that form. I'm trying to keep one shot to the next shot the same as the last shot of last month to the first shot of next month, all in the same place. And there's a copper equilibrium that people speak about, which essentially is a point where your bullet, as it goes through your rifling, is putting some copper down, and it's pulling some copper out. And I'm trying to keep it at a point where it's always putting down as much as it's pulling out. You're staying in the same place. For me, I found I really have not got any of my rifles that are running to where they're over coppering. And all of them seem to like that, from the little 223 up to the 375. They all are behaving, you know, the 338s, the 300 Win Mags, all that are doing pretty well. I don't run guns very hard. I'm not doing 3,000 or 5,000 rounds a year with any one of the rifles, but for the way I'm doing it and the way I'm running, that's working for me. Now, that's the basic regime. I should go through some of the equipment to use to do that and some of the other details. Most people should know by now that they're using the likes of a bore guide, where essentially you want to run it through the rifle. It essentially is about protecting. I'll put this in here so you can see what you're talking about. I'll just put this down. I'll explain this a little bit later. It's the part to do with your rifle. I'll put all that stuff down. Pull our bolt out. Put our bore guide in, and then we'll run the appropriate. So essentially we've got the ability to essentially then go through and run our mop up and back through our barrel, and essentially what your bore guide is about is stopping from at your throat at the beginning of your barrel, that you are not putting hard metal against things. And it's a good practice to run a bore guide, and whether it's a universal unit or it's a caliber specific one like this, the universal ones tend to have a chamfer on the front there. You have a lockdown point that you can actually set up in your actual bolt to actually hold it in there, and then you've got the same thing going on. This unit here has essentially an nice O-ring that's set to the size of the chamber, an O-ring to make it grip, a piece at the back here to be able to make it sit out and hold where the bolt is, holds it nice and straight and keeps the guide or actual your push through, keeps it nice and straight. Now what I'd like to qualify with that is a couple of things. That's the nicest way to do it. but there are some details I would go through in a way of what's relevant for that. Here I have probably the worst style of push through that you can actually get for a rifle. If you're looking close, you'll see that essentially it's one of the multiple units that comes out of a kit. It's got threads on it and it pulls apart, and then you can see here these little marks, these little rub marks where the steel, because of those little edges, there's always a little filing process going on between them. So this is probably, although it's usable and in a ball guide situation it's workable, it's probably the worst of this sort of thing you can get because of these little hard marks. Now keep in mind, one of the things that I would go with is that barrel wear, as much as yes that's a negative and potentially there's some issues, down here you'll tend to find doesn't cause much of an issue. So the right thing to do, you're looking after your barrel, it's the bit that makes it go straight. The truth of it is the barrel is hard metal, this is soft metal. There's very little wear comes from this. I would always try and go with the likes of this, which is actually a composite rod. So essentially it's a lot softer. You know, the likes of a lot of the steel ones we have are actually lightly coated, so they're powder coated rods to go in there. This is where you can actually go through and then there's no steel against steel. Even though this is a soft steel, it's a hard steel, there's no steel against steel. It's just nicer on that sort of score. The things that are actually more relevant for your rifle and the things that people can very much do wrong cleaning wise, essentially is up at the other end of the barrel. In under here is what's called your crown. Now for the people who don't know what your crown is, essentially your crown is simply, you have your barrel which has the flat end on it, the hole in the middle there, well just around the hole, just around the actual barrel hole is the piece that's called the crown. Now in some gunsmiths, some rifle makers will put a nice little chamfer on there that makes that quite strong. It's still the most important part of your barrel because as that bullet leaves, it needs it to be completely uniform as it leaves. If there's a little chunk out of the place where it's a little bit crooked and uneven at that point, then what will actually happen is the gas is going to release at a different place and your bullet is not going to be as stable. You want that crown to be in perfect condition for an accurate rifle. So one of the biggest mistakes that people generally make, and that's with any one of these rods, is essentially when they put the push through right through and actually let the mop or the jag or whatever it is come out right at the end and then pull it back, that is when, unless you have exactly the right equipment, if there's the tiniest bit of an edge anywhere where the threads go in, where the brass goes on the end of it, that tiniest bit of an edge, and if you have a crown that has sharp, a lot of rifle makers, a lot of gunsmiths will leave that very sharp, trying to keep it at a very sharp edge in theory to make it more accurate because it is such a sharp, clean edge at the end there. But that also means even though that is super hard steel, it's super brittle steel. So the moment you push your push through right through and then pull it out, and you can see people do it, and you'll see there's a little tiny feel of that coming back through. And I'm sure in most people's heads, well, it's a good push rod, good rod. It's nice and brass. Brass is softer than steel. All those bits and pieces. The truth of it is that isn't actually what'll happen. That brass, that little edge that's on the back there, if that touches a sharp edge up the front here, what you can definitely get is, because it is so sharp and so brittle, it'll actually take a little tiny chip out of it. If you speak to most gunsmiths, they'll tell you that's one of the biggest reasons that a barrel goes crook. Not because it's worn out on the inside, not because it's, there's rifles that'll actually have 1/3 of the rifling gone and they'll still shoot straight. It's when the crown turns to mud is when you really start to lose some accuracy. That's one of the mistakes that can happen there, and a thing to keep in mind. It tends to be somewhere to be careful about. You don't have to get too weird about all that process. You just make sure that you either don't push the push through all the way through when you're mopping it, or when you do, you bring it back very carefully. So as it comes back across there, it works very carefully. Another thing, while I'm on the things that gunsmiths will tell you, and what is very much a problem with how some people clean their guns, is a dry bolt. It is one of the worst things for a gun. Now, I don't like a dry bolt. I like all the sides. I always leave them a little bit looped. I use the likes of a little bit of, I use the Tetra gun grease, But really I can also use any form of lubricant, but I like the actual bolt face to be a little bit wet. Obviously in dusty conditions and things that might cause you some issues if you've got grit coming up inside there. I keep my guns clean, I try and keep the dirt off them. I like this action to be nice and smooth and clean. The place that you've really got to be careful with and make sure it's not dry is actually your bolt face. So if I get a little pointer, essentially on your lugs, on your locking lugs, your bolt lugs up the front here, these faces here around either side, those faces there essentially are the faces that are up against where that actually lock in. So they actually go up there, we'll put him back in. So they go and actually are locking in behind there and coming down. They're pushing on little slides at the they're pushing in their grooves for where the lugs lock into. Now those, if they're dry, what's actually happening is that metal against metal, they're both hard metal, and metal against metal with no lubrication is wear. And especially if you run some higher load, you've got a bit of grit in the place, or you've got some high load where your loads are locking things up a little bit, so you're getting a bit more case expansion, you have to pull it out. If it's dry, then you're wearing on the back side of that, and what will happen very quickly is you open up your headspace. So it's another thing of a very common damage point to your action in this case, because of essentially running that dry. A little bit of lube every time when I go through and clean them. I will go through and make sure that I've put a little squirt of lube down the side. I'll work that in with my fingers. I'll make sure it's on the back of the bolt lugs as a very important thing. While I'm on the bolt, I should go through the fact of actually keeping your bolt clean is actually very important. Now obviously the thorough way to do this is to pull your bolt to pieces. Whatever your bolt is, pull it to pieces. You largely want it pretty dry inside. There's a couple little points on different bolts where you'll actually want a tiny bit of lube inside there, but largely you want a bolt pretty dry. What I have done, and I'm sure this gunsmiths will cringe, but if you do it properly it'll work. I've had to do this in the field. When I think it was my 300 Win Mag, 700 rem, that was out, and all of a sudden I had essentially what felt like a hang fire. The actual bolt, the actual trigger pulled, went click, didn't feel right. What's going on? 3 seconds later the gun went off. What the hell was that? What's going on there? That was like a scary moment for there. What the hell happened there? This gun wasn't very old. What's going on? I hadn't disassembled my bolt. I hadn't looked inside there, but essentially then I basically re-racked it with a dry bolt. Sorry, with no round in there. Did the same thing. Pulled the trigger. No click. I actually whacked the side of the gun. Went click. Okay, there's something wrong in the action. It's really got to be to do with the bolt. I was out in the field. I didn't want to go through and strip my bolt down at that stage. What I do have in my car, and what I used, was some contact cleaner. Now, this is just a particular brand, but it's contact cleaner. So electrical terminal cleaner. It's contact cleaner. It essentially is stuff that is supposed to leave no residue. And what I simply did in that situation was I went and sprayed thoroughly, got fluid to run through the bolt. I was surprised at how much black stuff came out of it. I presume it was to do with the assembly coating they had on there. I'm never really sure to this day exactly what I found in there. Hadn't fired much, but a lot of gunk came out of it. I sprayed that all through. I followed it up with some WD-40 I had with me. Actually, I don't remember if it was WD-40 or Ballisto, whatever I had with me. I folded it up and then I chased it all out to try and get it back to dry, hoping to leave a tiny film over the working points by using the contact cleaner. I let the bolt dry thoroughly, which would be a very important detail. You wouldn't want any solvent to come out of your bolt and go down into your trigger, because essentially down your trigger, as much as the trigger wouldn't be affected by a solvent, there are little lock studs, there are your settings and some of the screws that are held in there that have very fine Loctite on them, that if you were to let solvent get down and then potentially they're going to come loose, and that means you could end up with your trigger adjusting, which could move you into a dangerous situation. So certainly it was, for me it was drying it out. It was in the middle of summer, it was 40 degrees, it was no issues in the way of drying, but it would be something that if you're ever in that situation you have to be very sure. And I'm not really suggesting this as a way to do things properly. I am putting it forward as what did work for us. once I'd actually done that and cleaned that through, I found that not only did it fix the problem, but the whole way the gun fired, the way the trigger worked, everything was a lot nicer than it had been for a long while. And it was really a clue that actually cleaning inside your bolt is very, very important. So a bit of a bush mechanic's way of getting around things, but worked for us. And to be truthful, it's something that I've found, and the more I've been around the likes of contact cleaner in places where I do want to clean some stuff out without using aggressive chemicals like essentially true solvents in the way of going into the higher levels of solvent, this stuff works, and because of the nature of it, tends to leave a tiny film of oil in the crevices and that style of things, but cleaning out the carbon. So it is one of those cheats that I use in rare occasions. On the comment of cheats, another one that I'll do in occasions. You notice when I went to clean this rifle, because it is an adjustable rifle, I can get the cheek rest out of the road easy, get the buttstock out of the road easy, and done simply. On most of my rifles, there's a positive and a negative that goes with this stuff on these things. As I mentioned before, they are a little bit flexible, which isn't altogether positive, but they are great for changing shooters and also for cleaning your rifle. For rifles where that isn't so easy and you have them accurately set up, you're very comfortable where they are, I'm only doing minimal cleaning, I have another choice. Another thing that'll probably make gunsmiths cringe, but something that I will do on occasion to actually clean a rifle without moving that sort of stuff. I will do what is probably seen as a no-no, and once again it goes with qualification. This is something to be very careful with, but I'll actually clean the rifle from the other end. I will clean it from the muzzle. Now I have a very particular process for doing that. I don't want to push carbon back inside there, so that is not what I want to do. So I'm being careful. Jen tends to be in a rush, it's because I don't want to pull other things down, but I'll actually go through the process very carefully. I'm looking after my crown, I want to be very careful about that. I'll very carefully take in a coated rod, push it right through, so I've got it in there, it's nice and safe. I'll then attach my mop, my jag, whatever I'm using. What I'll use the mop, I'll do the same process. I'll run that through, I'll make it wet and take it through, and then I'll tend to use this style of to get the patches through, where you have the little eyelet. I'll screw that on the end, I'll put a patch in there, and I'll pull it back out the front. Now, I would have to say, and I would qualify very much what I'm talking about here, is that if you're going to do this sort of thing, it's at your own risk. But it is, in my mind, I am very much the person to I want to keep my gun clean regardless of the time I've got. I might be in a flat doing whatever I'm doing, and the gun isn't getting all the time I want it to. That doesn't mean I'm going to put it off and I'm going to not clean the rifle. And I will go through and do that. It has to be done with great care. You've got your crown that you're messing with, and it is not what I'd call as a recommendation, but in being fully honest about what I do, yes, I do that on occasion. I'll go through and clean them from the front. I'm still doing the same thing with the mop. I'm still pulling the dirt out the front, but I will not go through and I'm not messing up all the back of my rifle, but I do want to clean it. I'm not going to put it in the cupboard. I'm just not going to put it away in the safe without going through the barrel and cleaning it. And I should go through there's some other bits and pieces that we're also talking about. I will also always go through and with different small brushes and things, I'll go through and clean my chamber. So I want to clean up to where the brass finishes, so I want to make sure that's all clean inside there. I'll tend to use the bolt with a toothbrush and scrub the front of the bolt in a general clean. Like I said, I'll tend to spray them down with the Ballistol and let them soak for a little bit, wipe them over with a rag. Again, a rag is a very important thing to me. I'll always, I have different levels of rags that I'll always use. I'm a mechanic and I'll tend to use the rags according to what the rifle is. Those are the basic bits and pieces of cleaning that sort of stuff. Another thing that I will do all the time in the way of cleaning a rifle is, finishing. I have this crappy looking, who'd want to touch it rag. It's actually lightly soaked with oil, and it'll almost make my hand shiny to wipe it. It's what I'll put a gun away with. I'll actually make sure the whole thing, scope, the works, is wiped down with this. I'm taking any excesses off, but I'm actually going through and making sure that everything on this rifle, everything that's been touched, has a very light film, which is not sprayed on. It's actually wiping any excess off, and it's putting oil on. That's the favourite rag for the gun shop at the moment. This one's coming up to be that way when this one gets too dirty. Part of what I'm doing in the cleaning side of things. In the form of what I'm talking about there is, like I said, I've really moved into where minimal barrel cleaning is what I'm about. I will always make sure the guns are very clean in all other forms, but in the fashion of actually running brushes or solvents, I no longer do that with a rifle. And I would say also, one of the things that is I suppose part of the learning process I've been through is, unless you're having a problem, unless you have a rifle that is basically making a lot of copper, basically taking a lot of copper, it has a copper problem, then, which I don't have and I haven't had. In that situation, then maybe there is some merit to going through and doing the extra cleaning. And you're in that spot, that's all you got, then okay, you've got a solvent, clean it, okay, I get it. Largely, if you've got a barrel like that, unless the damn thing is a brilliant barrel, I wouldn't be using the barrel. I would change the barrel. What I find is it is about minimal cleaning. Another thing I do want to raise is all the concerns with barrels wearing and bullets wearing and cleaning it out, because the concern of the copper causing wear. Copper doesn't wear a barrel. What wears a barrel is the thousands of degrees of blast that actually runs, that forces the bullet, the actual powder exploding, and the sandblasting and the torching that's happening from there is where your barrel wear actually comes from. So that is what will essentially wear away at the throat and coming up in and work up into the barrel and start to wear away your rifling. That is what actually wears them. I know of rifles that still shoot in the 1.5 MOA that have done 10,000 rounds in the likes of 223s, which the guys over here with roo shooting will actually push their barrels without cleaning them at all. They will wear out eventually for sure, but it's actually not through a lack of cleaning. It's through essentially the blast from the actual chamber, from your actual explosion of the round, that's actually causing the wear in them. There are probably more barrels replaced, certainly in the shorter side of life, more barrels replaced for what people have done to them rather than what they haven't done to them. Now, exclude from that obviously corrosion in the way of rust and things like that, where people just haven't cleaned them, they've left them in the back of the truck, or they're in a cabin and they end up rusty, and that's a different story. But in the way of something that isn't dealing with rust, the most common damage is the way they've been operated, the way they have been cleaned. And like I said, whether that's from chunking things back and damaging the crown, that's from leaving them, cleaning them and solvent cleaning them and leaving them completely dry. They're obviously without lube on the bolt. It's obviously something that you should be putting some lube on your bolt. They'll tend to naturally run a little bit of lube in there. If you're not cleaning, they'll tend to be a little bit of lubrication, but they can dry out obviously in different conditions. So running a bit of lube on the bolt, to me, the very natural thing. Unless that bolt slides backwards and forwards very gently and very easily, very nicely, then I'm always trying to lube them. I can't stand the feel of metal rubbing on metal. I really am a mechanic, and the way our world works is metal runs on oil. And that's how it's supposed to run. So that's really how I like to have it. But in the nature of it, all the rest of it, really it's a very minimal thing. I'm trying to, as I said, leave that rifle for my clean is really to do not much more than to clean the tiny bit of carbon that's left there on a barrel that's running nicely, and to leave a tiny bit of oil there. And it's also exactly the same as what I do when I'm breaking in a barrel. It's to tell me what my rifle's doing. So if I do a clean one day and all of a sudden I'm finding a lot more dirt and carbon there, not something I really run into, but it's something I'm looking at. There's obviously, in a way of very, very thoroughly looking after your rifle, getting them inspected, seeing what your bore is can be a relevant thing. The truth of it, it's not the type of thing I do. I'll go through, if I get a rifle that is no longer holding its group, and I've done all I can do and the rifle's shooting like it should do, then okay, then it's time to do an inspection. At the rate I'm shooting now, I'm just not doing the rounds to get to that sort of place. But like I said, this minimal form of cleaning, which I'm trying to keep that copper, fragrance of carbon in the same place as it is when it's shooting all the time, is working for me, and it's working well.